we'll get started in just a minute as soon as Melissa is ready.
I'm ready.
All right.
My cat was playing with a thumbtack, so that had to be interrupted.
Well, welcome to the first event for 2022's Love Your Body Week. We are so excited to have Melissa here with us. A little bit about Melissa. Melissa is a descendant of the Umatilla and Nimiipuu, Sac Fox, and Anishinaabe peoples. She is a writer, storyteller, story listener, chaplain, and educator. Melissa has worked in forensic mental health, higher education, artistic and spiritual care settings for over a decade and currently works as the Behavioral Health Aide Project Director for Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. She approaches her work from a trauma-informed healing justice lens with a focus on the intersections of spirituality, navigating the experience of being human, and creative practice. Melissa is an introvert, a cat mama, a lover of plants, a reader, a beader, a painter, a supporter of the Oxford comma, and a fierce advocate for rest and radical imagination. Thank you, Melissa, for being here today. And I will just preface that if anyone has any questions throughout the talk, please just put them in the chat and we can come back to any questions at the end after Melissa is done presenting.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, y'all, for being here on a Monday afternoon. I appreciate it. You starting out your week with me. That's very kind. I'm going to share my screen and dive into this presentation, which I actually named last night. So it has a little different name than what was in the invitation. So it's now called 10 Lessons on Self-Love After More Than 2 Years of Isolation. So I live alone right now in Olympia, Washington, and I have my 2 cats, but other than that, I've been really isolated for the last 2+ years. Because of COVID, I don't drive, I don't have a car, so public transportation has been really difficult with COVID and my chronic illness. So I've really been very isolated. I've seen very few people, really not very many. I don't have a big community up here, and it's been rough. But reflecting on this presentation has been really helpful because I was like, oh, I learned some things during these couple years of isolation. And that's what I want to share with you today. So on this slide, there's a picture of a person holding some huckleberries that they have just collected. And there's also a picture of some traditional baskets holding different medicines. There's huckleberries in those baskets, and I think looks like maybe some ferns, maybe some cedar as well. And these pictures are sort of in tribute to my Umatilla and Nimiipuu relatives and ancestors. These are some of our traditional foods and traditional medicines. So when I'm thinking about self-care, self-love, during this time of isolation, the types of medicines that are really helpful, this is what I think about. So as Lauren said, my name is Chaplain Melissa Bennett, also just called Melissa, and I'm a descendant of the Umatilla, Nimiipuu, Sac Fox, and Anishinaabe nations. I am currently the Behavioral Health Aide Project Director at Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board, which we haven't been open physically in a while, but the building is right across from the Native Center at PSU. So we're neighbors in a sort of way. So to tell you a little bit more about me, I do have several intersecting identities, as many of us do. I'm a transracial adoptee, which means that I was adopted by non-Native people, so people who come from a different community and culture than I do. And then I also, and I'm a Native woman, so I talked a little bit about that. I've had chronic illness for over 20 years, complicated chronic illness for over 20 years. So I've had issues with mental health since I was very young. I think when you're adopted, trauma kind of comes with territory. and anxiety and depression can sometimes follow that. So I've been dealing with anxiety as long as I can remember. But the complicated chronic illness, which I'll talk more about, over 20 years. And then I also have ADHD, so I am considered neurodivergent. This image, the background is a picture of an onion field, which is where I grew up. This particular field used to belong to my grandfather, and I spent many summers weeding those onions, walking with my cousins and my grandpa up and down the rows, weeding onions, which is not fun. It doesn't sound fun, and I promise you, it's not fun. It's a lot of work. But as an adult, it really shaped who I am and how I experience the world as somebody who grew up in a farming community. And then there's a picture of two Umatilla Cayuse women in the Blue Mountains, which is on the Umatilla Reservation. And that's just to show these two different parts of my identity and the way that I see the world. So adoption for me has meant assimilation. I was adopted in the mid-70s. And at that time, the mentality was very much, you don't want these adopted children to feel different. You don't want them to feel like outsiders. So do everything you can to assimilate them into your family and into your culture and into your community, which meant that I was not raised in my tribal community. I didn't even know another Native person until I was in middle school, when I finally was around more kids. And then I didn't really start engaging in Native community until my late teens, early 20s, when I had other Native friends and we started going to powwows together. We were finally old enough that at least one of us could drive, and we would go up to Shamawa Indian School and we would go to powwows. So assimilation is part of my adoption story, which led to a lot of confusion, a lot of trauma, a lot of isolation. Knowing that I was Native and knowing that I was adopted also meant that I knew who I was, but I didn't know what that meant, which was really confusing and really difficult. It was hard for me to connect to my culture because I didn't know anybody from my communities and from my culture. So that also led to a lot of isolation, a lot of feelings of separation. I learned recently that adopted folks, like 70% of adoptees have some form of neurodivergence. And they estimate that, or they think that it's because of trauma that comes from being separated from your original families. But I also have multiple families and a whole lot of love. So I have an adoption story where my adoptive parents, my family, we're all really close. We love each other very much. We're very different, but we still love each other and have good relationship most of the time. So as you can imagine, when you have multiple families, you have a lot of love and also a lot of complexity. So that is part of my identity. Then there's this tribal identity. And you can see on the left-hand side, there's an image. This is an Anishinaabe, from an Anishinaabe story. Both pictures are from Anishinaabe story. It's our creation story of Sky Woman. And Sky Woman fell through the sky world. And in the sky world was the tree of life. And as she was falling, she was pregnant when she fell, but she fell and she grabbed seeds from the tree of life and fell through the sky. And all these geese came and surrounded her and helped her kind of float down to this watery world that we were living in. And she landed on the back of a turtle. And she asked for the help of the creatures who are already there, as you can see in this picture. And she asked them to help her create a home, create a land. She asked the water beings. And the little muskrat was the last one that said they would help. Like lots of the creatures said, oh, we'll try to help you. And they went down into the water and they dove down and they couldn't reach the bottom of the water, and they'd come back up. And finally Muskrat, who was this little, rodent, this little humble creature, said, I'll try, and went down all the way down to the bottom of the ocean and got this little bit of dirt and brought it back up to the surface. And by the time muskrat got back up to the surface, muskrat was almost dead, had barely any life left from being gone and under the water for so long. But Sky Woman took that little piece of mud and put it on the back of the turtle, and that's what created Turtle Island. I tell this story because it's really important to me as part of my tribal identity and part of my identity as an adoptee, as someone with chronic illness, as somebody who has trauma history, to remember the importance of this little muskrat, and that even this most humble creature who almost sacrificed his life and his well-being created this world that we live in. And that has been a helpful story for me when I think about my own body and my own struggles in this world. So I offer that story to you all as a sort of gift, as a reminder that the most humble of beings can really create worlds, right? So as Lauren said, I'm a descendant of the Confederate tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, which is made up of 3 nations, the Umatilla, the Cayuse, and the Walla Walla. The Nez Perce tribe, also known as the Nimiipuu, which means the people. The Sac Fox Nation, I'm Thunder Clan, and Citizen Potawatomi Nation, I'm from Bear Clan. And then there's my life with chronic illness. I was going through this list in my mind going, is that everything? I don't know if that's everything. I feel like I'm missing pieces, but you'll see that it is complicated. Some people have chronic illness and they're given a diagnosis. You have such and such autoimmune disorder. You have such and such thing going on with your body. I don't have that. I've had various diagnoses over the years. I joke with my doctor that every time I talk to her, I get a new diagnosis. There's a lot of questions about what's going on with my body. And I think this is really common for a lot of people and something that we don't talk about enough. So for me, I deal with chronic pain and chronic fatigue. I have depressive anxiety and panic disorders. I have something that I'm calling postural tachycardia syndrome. There's something called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, also known as POTS. And I don't have the O part. So the O part means that when you change positions, well, POTS is when you change positions. So whether you're sitting, you go from sitting to standing, or standing to laying down on the couch, or whatever. When your body moves positions, your heart rate jumps way up and your blood pressure drops. And so it's like running a marathon all day long. My blood pressure stays pretty steady, but my heart rate races. It'll go from about 86 at resting to about 125 if I change positions, which is exhausting and lends itself to the chronic fatigue. I have complex PTSD. I won't get into all that. I've talked a little bit about the trauma that comes along with being adopted, but there's other traumas that I've had in my life. And I will say that being a Native person, an Indigenous person in a colonized land, is a trauma all in itself. I may or may not have Lyme disease. I have some of the markers for Lyme disease. I don't have enough of the markers for the CDC diagnosis, but it's really hard to get the CDC diagnosis. And a lot of people with chronic Lyme disease don't have enough markers to be considered officially having Lyme disease, but there's a lot of people who are suspected of having Lyme disease because they have some of the other markers, or they have fewer markers. And I'm one of those people. So while I don't have the official diagnosis, I have all the symptoms and I'm in treatment for Lyme disease as well. Epstein-Barr, which is a virus that a lot of people have in their bodies. It's the monovirus. A lot of us carry it. And for most people, it doesn't bother them, but it can become acute again. So once you've had it, for most people, it's done. It stays dormant. It's over and done with. But for some of us, those symptoms can come back in an acute way. And so that also plays into this. I have systemic inflammation. Whenever I get my blood work done, my inflammation markers are really high. The doctor has no idea why. We're still trying to figure that part out. Maybe it has to do with these other things. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Gut health issues, metabolic syndrome, which is something that I affectionately call Native woman syndrome, or being a woman of color in this world. And metabolic syndrome impacts your blood pressure, your cholesterol, and your blood sugar. So, and then on top of all that, I'm perimenopausal. Just want to throw that in because that, I'm warning you, if you're a bleeding person, that will complicate all the other symptoms and all the other issues that are going on. So as my doctor says to me, she doesn't want to call me complicated. She calls me nuanced. So I have nuanced chronic health issues. And then I also have neurodivergence. I have ADHD. I love this quote from Ursula Le Guin, one of my favorite writers. If you are a fan of science fiction, fantasy, radical imagination, if you haven't read her, read her. If you have read her, then you know what I'm talking about. She's amazing. But this quote, make a virtue of your peculiarities. So we have neurotypical people, we have neurodivergent people. Neurotypical people like to say that neurodivergent people are weird, peculiar, odd, different. There's a lot of language that's used. And so this quote, make a virtue of your peculiarities, is really special to me because I think, yeah, let's look at the gifts that come from being neurodivergent. For me, ADHD shows up as poor memory, impulsivity, racing and repetitive thoughts, trouble focusing, and an inability to multitask. I'm really bad at it. I did not get diagnosed with ADHD until last summer. So I am 45 now. I was 44 when I got diagnosed. Often for folks who are born female, we have it's really hard to get a diagnosis. And I've talked to folks around my age range recently who are just now getting diagnosed. And it's shocking how many of my friends are in that same situation. But once you know, you can start managing it. Like once I found out, I was like, oh, this explains so much about my life that I did not know or understand before. And it's helping me navigate the world in a different way and helping me speak up for myself in a different way. I also have dyscalculia. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's basically what we know of. This is a very general explanation, but what we know of as dyslexia, but with numbers. And I have challenged spatial awareness. So it's hard for me in a physical space to know where my body is in relation to other things. I run into walls a lot. I run into tables, doorknobs. If I'm getting into a car, I hit my head on the car doors a lot. And I never knew why. And when I got this ADHD diagnosis and I started learning more about it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a thing. Like, I'm not crazy, right? Like this is part of being neurodivergent for me. And then I am very easily overwhelmed by intense sensory experience. So if there's a lot of loud noise or like a repetitive noise, the worst noise in the world to me is that beeping sound on a bus. You know, when you're waiting for the bus and it's like beep, beep, beep. Oh my gosh, I cannot handle it. Like it physically hurts my body. Being in a bar with a lot of loud noise or a lot of crazy lights at a concert, all of that is really overwhelming for me and physically hurts my body. COVID has, of course, complicated everything. And I just want to take a second to acknowledge, because I don't feel like it's really being acknowledged in a profound way in our society, but we have reached a point where more than a million Americans have died from COVID. And we don't know how many people have long COVID. I think there's still folks who are just realizing that they have long COVID or understanding that that's a real thing and that it has this impact. There's not enough research yet to know what that's going to look like. But to really take a moment to think about 1 million people have died. And all of the people whose lives they touched, you know, their families, their friends, it's a huge loss and a tremendous trauma in our personal lives. If it's touched us personally, I know it has for me. And then also as a society, as communities. So it's a trauma that's existing that I think a lot of people don't recognize or realize is occurring. And of course, now we have this sort of demand for, I'm not going to say sort of, we have a demand for return to work, return to school, returning to what people think of as normal, and a removal of mask mandates. All of these things, when you have chronic illness, when you are from an underserved community, queer, trans, a person of color, indigenous person, someone with chronic health issues or disability issues, like this makes everything so much harder, right? For me, I now have to think about what are my boundaries, and I'll talk about this in a little bit. But it's just complicated everything. And when we have work and schools, workplaces and schools that are telling us, okay, COVID's over and it's time to come back and everything's normal again. Those are lies. Like, things are not normal again. Things are never going to be normal again. We are never going to be in this world. We can't go back to a pre-COVID time because COVID has happened. 1 million Americans have died. We can't rewind that. Everything has changed. And we really need our systems, our institutions to recognize that. And I just want to name it because it feels like disregarding the more than 40% of Americans who are living with chronic illness. Self-love is a social justice issue. When we love ourselves, really do the work to show up for ourselves, it's an affront to oppressive systems. We are currently healing from white supremacy within systems of white supremacy, patriarchy, this sort of oppressive white supremacist systems that we live in. There are threats to our safety. The threats to our health, to our safety are real. There is anti-queer violence, there is anti-trans violence, there is violence against people of color. There's right now we're dealing with all this reproductive injustice is coming to the surface, more so than it has in the past in our lifetimes. We're dealing with capitalism. All of these things threaten how we exist in the world, and they threaten our safety, they threaten our sense of well-being. So if we show up for ourselves, it's like giving a big FU to these systems that are trying to keep us from loving ourselves. So it makes our well-being and showing up for ourselves that much more important. We want to tell these systems, no, like you don't get to dictate my health and my well-being. I'm going to show up and love myself, even inside of this trauma, even inside of all these difficulties. So these are my 10 lessons on the importance of self-love from my time in isolation. Number 1, it's important. Self-love is important. This quote from Audre Lorde says a lot to me. Once we recognize what it is we are feeling, once we recognize we can feel deeply, love deeply, can feel joy, then we will demand that all parts of our lives produce that kind of joy. As much as there is trauma in this world, and as much as we talk about trauma and we experience trauma, we also have legacy of joy. We also have legacies of hope. We also have legacies of love. And we get that. That's our birthright. We get to tap into that as human beings. That's part of the dignity of being a human being. So I have photos here of Maria Tallchief living her best life dancing. Toni Morrison, living her best life, writing. Julia Child at her living her best life in Paris, France, cooking at this teeny little stove, being Julia Child, right? So what are the ways that you show up for yourself, and how do you think about your own joy and your own sense of self-love? And then I have this little note over here, make a plan for hard days. So when you're feeling good and you're feeling in that joy and you're feeling in that sense of hope and love for yourself, sit down and write out, here's what I'm going to do when I don't feel so hot. Here's what I need when things are hard and I'm not in that space of self-love. When I am feeling really down and depressed and anxious because of the world, because of my illness, because of whatever that thing is that's going on in your life, have a plan. Because then you can open your notebook without thinking and go, okay, here's what I need to do. Here's one thing I can do for myself today, right? Which can bring you back into that space of joy, even if it's just for a little bit. Make a plan for hard days. Lesson 2, establish boundaries. What do you need to feel safe? What do you need to feel healthy? What do you need to feel happy? What do you need to help you feel more relaxed, to feel cared for? Write it down. When you're making that plan for those hard days, write this out. What is it that you need in your life? Don't think about, what so-and-so needs. You may love so-and-so very much, but their needs may be really different than yours. And that's okay. Really look inward to think of, I love this picture because I'm like, oh, she's growing a boundary garden. What is in your boundary garden, right? How do you establish your boundaries and then really enforce them? How do you talk to people and say, I don't feel comfortable. Like, I've had to really think about for myself and COVID, like, what are my boundaries with COVID and safety for my health? And I had to say to people who I love dearly, like my nephews, I'm like, you're not vaccinated. You can't come in my house. If you want to hang out outside, I'm cool with that. We'll go hang out outside 6 feet apart. We'll put some chairs out and we can sit and chat, and I'm good with that, right? That's a boundary for me. So thinking about these questions, answering those questions for you on a good day and putting them in that plan so that you know what your boundaries are and holding to those. Lesson 3, this is my cat, Finnegan. This is how he likes to sleep. Rest, y'all. Rest is so important. And we live in this society that doesn't like rest. We like rest, but our institutions, they don't like rest so much. We have a society that is constantly telling us to push, to be productive, to show up, to push through the pain, push through the sickness. I can't tell you how many times growing up, even now, my mother will say to me, oh, you'll feel better if you go to work. I'm like, yeah, that's not really how it works. I actually will feel worse and I'll make other people feel bad because I'll make them sick, Taking care of your body, listening to your body. It is okay to stop. It is okay to rest, and it is okay to ask for it. So you don't always have to be creating, doing, contributing to the world. Your birth, again, your human dignity, grants you rest and leisure as well. That is as much your right as you have the right to create in this world. Rest. And this little cartoon, I know it's kind of hard to see because it's so tiny, is this woman and she's got all this stuff going on in her mind. And the little cat on her lap is just saying, let go. Be a cat. Rest on the arm of your couch. It's great. Take naps when you can. And rest doesn't always have to mean sleep, right? Rest can just be, I'm going to go for a walk. I want to get my mind off this thing. I'm going to watch a Netflix show, or I'm going to make myself a nice meal, whatever feels restful for you, to step outside of that like constant pressure of go, 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 do, that can be restful. Also, if you don't know who Tricia Hersey is, the Nap Bishop or the Nap Ministry, check her out. You can Google the Nap Ministry, find her Twitter, find her Instagram. She's all over the internet. She is magic. Lesson 4, keep up with the boring stuff. As someone with ADHD, I really don't want to do boring things. Boring things are like the last thing I want to do. If it's boring, no, thank you. To me, doing my chores, boring. Seeing my therapist, I mean, I wouldn't call that boring, but it's a thing that I have to do and keep up on, right? Taking my medication every day, multiple times a day, that's a hard thing for me. It's a hard thing for me to remember. And it is so important because I know when I haven't been taking my meds, my body feels very different. And it's not a good thing. Keep your appointments with your doctors, with, whatever is good, is there for your well-being. Return those phone calls. If your friend's been calling you and you miss them, but maybe you're an introvert like me, or you're just like, I don't know, I want to paint, or I want to do something fun. Like I want to do something else. Sometimes we need those phone calls with our really good friends too. So keep up with the so-called boring stuff. Keep doing those chores because you will feel better. It is part of self-care. Self-care is not all rainbows and roses and bubble baths. I mean, those things are great, but these things are important too. Lesson 5, find pleasure in movement. And movement in this case can be physical, it can be emotional, mental, it can be spiritual. It is really easy to get stuck when you're dealing with chronic illness, when you're isolated, when you are dealing with mental health issues, when you have neurodivergence, so many things that can keep us stuck, right, in different areas of our lives. And so the invitation here is to find pleasure in movement. I'm not somebody who wants to exercise. If someone says to me, like if I have my doctor say you need to exercise, luckily I don't have that kind of a doctor. I have in the past, but I don't anymore. I got rid of those kinds of doctors. If you are able to get rid of those kinds of doctors, I recommend it. But if someone says, just find pleasure in movement, that sounds really different to me. That's like, oh, I could finger paint. I could play with my fun sunglasses. These are some lovely elders hanging out at the swimming pool. I can go for a walk. I can dance around my living room naked if I want. Like, I can move slow. I can move fast. I can move spiritually through breathing exercises, grounding exercises. For me, spiritual practice is smudging. It is writing. It is painting, photographing things. I love to photograph flowers, and now is kind of that time. Mentally, when I'm on like that replay and that voice in my head is just like over and over, what can I do to move that and shift that energy? So thinking about what keeps you feeling stuck, what feels trapped in your body, in your joints. Our trauma can be stuck in our body. I saw that you all recommended that book, The Body Keeps the Score, I think, for this week. And that book talks a lot about these things. What thoughts are on replay in your mind? When was the last time you felt a sense of wonder, a sense of playfulness? What does freedom mean to you? And then I caution, pursue pleasure, but not poison. Because sometimes what can happen is we're like, hey, I feel really good when I smoke weed. Awesome. And it goes from being medicine to being poison, right? When we become overindulgent in something. When it's like, oh, I feel better when I, buy some fun things for myself on Amazon or wherever. But if you buy so many things, it's like outside your budget, then pretty soon it starts to become a poison, right? So thinking about that as well, when we're thinking about pleasure, at what point do things go from being pleasurable to feeling like they're maybe making us sick? A glass of wine with dinner feels good. It helps me relax. But if I do it every single day, I start to feel sick. Those kinds of things. Because then it becomes something else that's getting stuck in your body again, or getting stuck in your mind or in your spirit. So it's a delicate balance, but an important one. Lesson 6, becoming. This is from The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams. You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily or have sharp edges or have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. So when we think about who we are in this world, there's a lot of this, what do we call it? Wellness kind of culture that wants you to buy things. It's like part of capitalism. Be authentic, be the real you, be the best person you can be, blah, blah, blah. And it can feel like a lot of pressure. I have to be perfect, right? I have to be my authentic self in the world today. No, that's not how becoming works. Think about a stone. I wish I had one right here. I'm surprised I don't, but like a smooth stone. It took a long time, a long time for that stone to become smooth. It's been rolled around in water, sand, dirt, whatever, for eons in order to become smooth. Take your time. Go slow. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to know who you are right now. It's a process. So lesson 6 comes from The Velveteen Rabbit. Becoming and trusting that it takes time, and it's okay for it to take time and go slow. Lesson 7. This has been a huge one for me. Give and receive. Ask yourself, what is your medicine? What inspires you? What fills you with a sense of wonder? What can you rest into? Where do you feel joy? Listen to the people who are closest to you. What do they appreciate in you? These are all clues as to your gifts in this world, right? For me, those things are writing, speaking, doing things like this, building altars for people, doing tarot reading. I love tarot reading. Spiritual care, that's part of my spiritual care for others. But these are also things that I really love to receive. I love to read a good book with really beautiful poetry. I love to meet with other intuitive people, empathic people who can share their interpretations of spirit with me. I love beautiful spaces, right? Where I can walk in and feel comfortable and feel at home. So not only when you ask yourselves these questions and you figure out what is my medicine, it's not just about giving. It's also about being able to receive those gifts back, right? And for so many of us who are empathic people, who are neurodivergent people, who are chronically ill people, we give and we give and we give and we give and we give. And it's hard for us to get back. Take that time to receive and open yourself up to the love that is around you. It's taken me, I'm 45 now. I've already said that. It's hard for me to believe sometimes. But it's taken me my whole life to realize that I am surrounded by love, that I have the love of friends and family members. And I didn't really get it until recently. So being able to receive that is also really important in our healing and the way we love ourselves. Lesson 8, belonging. You might recognize a couple of these people. Find your people. Where can you be yourself? Who helps you be your best self? This over here is Stacy Taniguchi, who is the interim director. I'm going to call her that. I don't know if she would call herself that at the DRC. And Pedro Torres, who used to work in the cultural resource centers and now is working in admissions down in Los Angeles. So these are my people. We all used to work together at PSU in the cultural resource centers, and these are my family. This is my chosen family. I love these two so freaking much. I can't even tell you. And when you find people where you can really be yourself and really they help you be your best self in the world, and they really encourage you and love you so much, hold on to them. Hold on to them. I couldn't have survived this pandemic without them, truly. We text like a bazillion times a day. We have a group text, and if one of us is missing from the text, we come back and we say, oh, I had 130 messages from everybody today. Woohoo! Or we had only 20. Y'all better do better, right? The sense of belonging is so important. We live in a time where loneliness is as much a pandemic as smoking. Like it causes the same amount of damage to people as smoking cigarettes does. Like there's all this research about the detriment of loneliness and isolation and what that does to our spirit. And when you can find your people, even though I haven't seen them in person for a while, we talk and connect in some way every single day. And that makes a big difference. And then I have our sweetgrass here, which is one of our most important medicines as Native people. And I put this here as a reminder that we don't braid sweetgrass alone. So when you're thinking about what is my medicine, what is my purpose in this world, remember that you don't do it by yourself. You know, that it's about connection to community. It's about belonging. You cannot braid sweetgrass as one person. You need somebody to hold one end so that you can braid the other, or you hold it and they braid, right? It takes at least two people to braid that sweetgrass. So remembering that, the importance of community in relationship to our medicine. Lesson 9, trust the pattern of your own life. This is a big one. Breathing. That's a pattern in our own bodies, right? Ocean waves. I'm sure you've seen those videos of, and if you haven't, go look them up on YouTube. These videos of the waves as they hit the beach and how it sounds like breathing. And you can match your breath with the sound of the waves hitting the ocean. The ocean waves are the breath of the planet, and they have their own pattern. So asking yourself, what is my pattern, right? And just like the Velveteen Rabbit teaches us, you may not know right away. It might take a little while. It takes some study. Who am I? What are my gifts? What brings me joy? How do I love myself best, right? What are the patterns in your life? And how do they shape who you are, right? And you can ground yourself in those things, just like you can ground yourself in your breath. Lesson 10 is one of my favorite lessons of all, because I'm a Capricorn and because I have ADHD. I want an A on everything, y'all. Like, I want it to be perfect. That isn't so great. The thing is, you don't need to have all the answers. I had a therapist once tell me, Melissa, instead of aiming for an A all the time, why don't you aim for like a high C? And I thought, whoa, how do you do that? But what a relief to let go of that need to know all of the things and to have the right answers and to be able to be what in my, like, meet some standard that I've created in my own mind or that society has given to me in my life. And again, I come back to Ursula Le Guin. To learn which questions unanswerable and not to answer them. This skill is most needful in times of stress and darkness. We don't have to have all the answers. And a lot of people in this society want to have answers, and they come up with the wrong ones, right? Like, oh, COVID's over. We don't need to wear masks anymore. I don't think that was the right answer to that question. You know, it's okay for things to take time. It's okay for us not to know. It's okay for there to be mystery in the world. That has been an important lesson for me in self-love. Loving myself means I don't have to know all the things. And I don't have to have all the answers. And it's okay to say, I really don't know. This is Maria. This is my other kitty. She's 17. She's the one who was playing with the tack earlier. So Katsiayo means my thanks for you. Thank you for being here, for listening, for hearing my 10 lessons on self-love after over 2 years of isolation. My email address is here, mbennett@npaihb.org, which stands for Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. That's my work email. If you want to connect, if you want to reach out at some point, feel free to email me. I'm open, happy to talk with folks. And we have a few more minutes, so I want to give time and space for questions and conversation. So I'm going to stop sharing. Hi. Do we have any questions? How are you all doing today?
I want to say thank you, Melissa. This was so wonderful and a great reminder to keep trying to take care of ourselves no matter how hard it is out there right now.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It is important. It's hard. And I think we don't hear that enough, that it's hard to love ourselves. And it's made harder when we're dealing with whatever it is we're dealing with, whether it be chronic illness or fatigue or just trauma, the world in general. And I feel like almost every day or every week, there's something new in the news that I'm just like, I cannot with this world anymore, you know? And then my therapist is like, you need to go break some things. And if you don't have something to break, you can take ice cubes and smash them with a hammer or whatever. And I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. It's hard to love ourselves and we need these reminders. So yeah. Thanks for the gratitude in the chat. I really appreciate that, y'all. Are there questions? Anything that stood out for you want to talk about?
I just want to say that I really appreciated like your comments, especially about like the pandemic and stuff. And like, I guess like something that I've been really struggling with is, even though I feel like I have my like, you know, love and belonging in my like immediate group of friends, the thing that I struggle with so much is seeing like the world at large not care about my life. As someone who would be very, very like, I'm very scared to like the possibility of getting like long COVID or something on top of the stuff I have. And just like figuring out how to like love yourself when the world would rather, you know, is pretty upfront about the fact that they want us dead. And just like how you cope with that. And I just want to say like, it was such a relief hearing you be open about like, just like stating it as a fact that this pandemic isn't over, no matter what people are saying. Because I feel like a lot of people try to like cover it up and like, I guess just like, I don't know, like how you just like deal with that, I guess.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I feel the same way. Like I have family members who are like, we don't need to wear masks around you. And I'm like, okay, let me explain it to you again. I've been sick for 20 years. Like this is not new, right? Like this is not, my parents do not get to say, what? Like, I'm Like, you were taking me to the doctor 20 years ago, so don't even, right? But you're right. Like, it feels that way. It feels like we're living in this world and in these institutions that just don't give a shit. That are like, oh, well, like, you won't get really that sick. People aren't getting that sick from COVID anymore. And I'm like, people are still dying from COVID. And when you have chronic illness, who knows what could happen, right? And like, personally, my immune system is so all over the place, depending on where I'm at in flare-ups of my symptoms, that I don't know. I don't know if one day, yeah, maybe I'd get COVID and it'd be a tiny cold. Maybe another day I get COVID and I would die, you know? And so you don't know. And that kind of uncertainty and unpredictability is exhausting. It is so exhausting. And I get emotional when I think about it because I'm just like so tired all the time, right? Physically, emotionally, all of that. And when I get there, that's when coming back to the boring stuff, those chores, is important. Those are the things that ground me. Because if I feel that overwhelmed in a dirty space, or if like my apartment is filthy, or I haven't, cooked for myself in a while, I've been eating junk food that I get through Uber Eats or whatever, it makes it a lot harder to manage those things. Whereas if I can get a handle on those boring things, then I feel a little bit stronger, a little more clear, to be able to remember my boundaries and to be able to clearly say to people, yeah, I don't feel really loved by you when you don't wear a mask. And I'm wondering what happened to your compassion and your empathy, and make them think about it, because I have to think about it all the freaking time. So it's not going to hurt them to think about it. Also, PSU, I see you. I know what you're doing over there. I hear about it. I know this demand for people to get back to school and get back to work, and this sense of ignoring people who have chronic health needs. And it's not okay. It's not okay. And my heart goes out to all of you who are struggling with that right now, because it's really hard. But just know that you're not alone at all. Really, like 40%, and I think it's a much higher number. That's just what Google told me, is that 40% of Americans are dealing with chronic health issues. I really think it's a lot higher than that, just based on the number of people I know who are dealing with it. That's a lot of people who need that extra support. So when we are able to love ourselves and take care of ourselves, and find those moments of strength to speak out, we do it for each other, because we don't always all have the energy all the time, right? But if I have the energy one day and I can say, I see you, PSU, or whoever, and then the next day I'm tired, but maybe you have the energy, then you can say it, right? We're there, we're in it together.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate that. And definitely, like, yeah, I think like the really hard thing is, like, I feel like it's hard seeing like the whole, like, so much, like the large part of society and institutions and stuff, like, do all of that, but it's almost like expected. It's so much harder seeing like people that I care about, and like I know on some level care about me, but for whatever reason still don't want to wear their masks. That's just like betrayal on a deep level. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get that people want to be done. I want to be done. We all, like, nobody wants to be more done than people who have chronic illness, let me tell you. But we're not. Yeah, we're not done. And I get it. I get the desire to want to be together and to not have to wear masks and to be what we think of as normal, but we're not there. And we have to think about what society considers the least of us, right? The people who are the most vulnerable. We have to think about them. There are people more vulnerable than I am, and I want to protect them, right? Yeah.
I'm aware of the time, and I appreciate everyone's engagement. I don't want to keep Melissa longer than we said. But Thank you again, Melissa, for today. And thank you everyone for coming, and just keep an eye out for further emails for all of the rest of the week's events.
I appreciate all of you so much. Thank you for being here and for everything that you're doing to keep going. We need you in this world and your spirit very much. You're welcome, y'all. Have a good day.